The Vice Chief of Operations for the U.S. Space Force is sounding the alarm about increasing Russian and Chinese attacks against U.S. assets in space. General David Thompson told the Washington Post, quote, "The threats are really growing and expanding every single day," adding that the U.S. will lose a space arms race to China within the next decade if it doesn't take action.
General Thompson, who is also the Vice Chief of Space Operations in the new military branch, appeared on Fox News and was pressed on China's posture in space and innovation. Let's watch.
China is putting up satellites at twice the rate that the U.S. is now.
Correct.
And at that pace, by the end of the decade, they will replace the U.S. as the preeminent power in space. When you look at the hypersonic missiles, when you look at satellites with robotic arms, just how much of a threat is China to the U.S. and to the rules of the road in space?
So China is a tremendous threat, as you noted. Now, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that they will be the leader in space by the end of the decade, but they're on an incredible pace.
Nomiki Konst is a director at Matriarch and host of the Nomiki Konst Show. Philip Wegman is a White House reporter for Real Clear Politics. Thank you both for being with us. So, Nomiki, what do you think is the policy implication of this? Because I don't think we can sabotage China's program. We would just have to increase focus on our own if this is something worth having a kind of space arms race over.
So what I don't understand about this is why the solution to the space strategy is just to have more satellites. I mean, there has to be a point where you have enough satellites if you're trying to interfere, if you're trying to block, if you're trying to monitor. To me, it's any sort of strategy that revolves around more to beat the other side just seems like, expanding the military-industrial complex with a new method of building weaponry. I don't really get it. I think we should be thinking more strategically, and I think that's one of the biggest problems with the geopolitical situation now is instead of thinking strategically and long-term, we think, how do we beat them in size and numbers, and how has that worked out for the last 40 years?
Yeah, and on that point, Philip, isn't this a case of General Thompson coming so close to getting the point, like he can almost touch it, and then at the very last second he says, well, we need to really run faster if we're going to win this race. Like, maybe we shouldn't have a kind of arms race in space. Maybe at this point we say, you know what, the trajectory we're on is like a ridiculous little fight in space that's going to make all of our satellites crash into the ocean. So what we need is a global pact about how we're going to develop this process going forward. But it seems like, no, that's not the way the U.S. thinks about it. No, we just need to make lots more satellites much faster so that if we have more, then we win and they lose.
I think there was also reporting in the Washington Post that Chinese and Russian satellites were interfering with the United States satellites on a regular basis through all sorts of things like, radio signals, and then also even in, lasers, right? And that's the sort of stuff that captures the imagination because you think, about this sort of Cold War battle, miles above us that we don't see, but that has massive implications. And we need more satellites than they do, and this will be another type of race that will, raise military budgets, meet parochial concerns in different congressmen's congressional districts, and oh, by the way, like maybe this new space race can lead to new innovation. I think it's interesting because I remember how Donald Trump was ridiculed for saying that we ought to have a space race. We ought to have a space force specifically dedicated to combating other nations' expansions in that realm. And it seems that there's a bit of a need for that. But my antenna goes up, and I'm very skeptical when any general walks out with stars on their shoulders and just says, what I need and what I haven't gotten from you guys is billions and billions of dollars more in hardware. That would really do the trick. So maybe he's right, but maybe there's a diplomatic angle here too. And certainly Joe Biden sold himself on being the foreign policy guy who could be a steady presence in the room and bring foreign leaders to consensus.
Right. Or he sold us on the idea that he was not Donald Trump, which was which was a real strong argument for a lot of people, not an affirmative argument for his own candidacy. Nomiki, do you think, there's a familiarity, I think, to this situation, this historical familiarity, like, oh, well, the Soviets, oh, China, these rising threats, and then we had this kind of cooling off period, obviously the collapse of the Soviet Union. We had this idea that China would liberalize as they had more interaction with us, and now we're right back to, nope, these are massive geopolitical threats, and they're beating us, and what can we do about it? Really nothing, but it's something that the foreign policy establishment can talk about in order to get more appropriations, that kind of thing. What do the American people, what do they want in these conflicts, and are they going to get it?
I mean, I think what's different about today is versus the Cold War is it's not really an ideological fight as it was over, ideology supposedly during the Cold War. And I think that's sort of what Biden is trying to do by having this democracy summit. We are the good guys. We believe in democracy. We believe in fair elections sometimes. All of these things to separate and differentiate so that when he has conversations about expanding our military budget and spending it on innovation and technology and advanced satellite weaponry or whatever, the lasers, he can make a case and say, well, what they're trying to do is interfere with how we do our business here through advanced technology. And if we are not on the cutting edge, then they're going to win and they're going to disrupt how our democracy functions. But the reality is, as we know, is Putin is just as much of a capitalist as they operate a little bit differently, of course, but it doesn't. The arguments don't stick the way that they did during the Cold War era.
No, you're right. It's not ideological. In fact, some political figures in our government idolize and admire and wish they had the kind of power that the oppressive regimes have from Biden kind of world wanting the sort of censor power over the internet that China has in order to crack down on COVID misinformation, from more Trumpy type people kind of being quietly admiring of the make your political enemies disappear thing that Russia does. You're right. It's not it's a man. What could we do with that level of control over what people are allowed to say? That kind of non-democratic situation.
And it's interesting you say that, because if you think about the fights that we're having today versus 20, 30, 40 years ago, they're much more subtle, but they're because of technology. We're having technological wars, whether it's algorithms that are boosting far-right extremist, propaganda, and it's pushing into communities so they can organize, or whether it's the space lasers in that fight. It's all not seen before your eyes. It's not a clear enemy. We don't really understand until it's too late who we're fighting, why we're fighting them, and how it's operating. And for the American people, it's like we're all basically just tools in this war over what? Power. I mean, there's nothing else. It's not ideology.
Well, Nomiki, Philip, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.